One of the ones I do want to mention, because I think its time has come because the compute is there, is using geostatistical methods, using stochastic methods, because it's an integrated method of inversion, and it allows you to bring in some constraints from the geology, and also by using a rock physics model, you can get some elements of downscaling. By downscaling, I mean going below the natural resolution of the seismic data. So what you're doing is making thousands, maybe, models that fit all the data that you have and are constrained by the rock model, but using uncertainty in your equations to express different realizations of that, putting it all together and post-processing. I've seen some truly spectacular results in areas where we've been looking at things like 1 meter sand type resolution, yes really, and drilling has been very successful on that. Modelling, as we've heard, is an area of the business where again is much used. We want to generate synthetic seismograms that replicate our data and tell us how the rocks that we're looking for will look. We've seen things like equivalent medium theory big here. Again, if you've got some kind of rock physics background, it can be extremely useful. The property distributions for the reservoir model, this is also a big area where we're trying to combine the measurements made at wells with the spatial information in the seismic. Again, if we can constrain those maps and those integrations by the rock physics model, we can get some excellent results. Another way of capturing the uncertainty. And just throw in there, this is Colin Beth's slide actually. And seismic anisotropy being a natural inversion of the data. I'm not really going to go into too much detail, but I think I have notes here somewhere on that. 4D is slightly different, and one of the interesting things about 4D is that basically what we're trying to get out is pressure and saturation inversion. That's a basic thing which, as we've seen, if we can understand the fluids and the state of those fluids in the subsurface over time, the evolution, we can use that information to update our reservoir model. There are some special needs that we have out of that, like the stress state, which are things which are not terribly easy to get a calibrated version of that directly out of the seismic. But with measurements, with borehole calibration, we can do this. The simulated seismic modelling, where you take, if you like, the reservoir view of the world, the reservoir engineer's view of the world, the model, turn that back into a seismic image, which can then be calibrated against real seismic. Again, that's something which really requires a lot of fluid physics calibration. And seismic history matching, as we've heard, I'm by no means, by the way, convinced that this is regular business in most large oil companies. It may be in some of the assets that we see perhaps in BP and Shell, but I can tell you some larger companies than they are, particularly in the NOCs, are not doing this. And, this is part of your know-how argument, or Dave's know-how argument, that know-how still resides in the larger, if you like, integrated oil companies. I think that's certainly the case. I talked about scale. This just really makes the point, I suppose. The seismic cell scale that we're looking at. Nice to hear that we're getting maybe down to 7.5, 5 meter type lateral resolution, vertical resolution. As resolution, still an issue perhaps, but I've seen some convincing things down at the 5 meter mark. We're in detection or resolution, good question, yes. But the case is that the flow simulation, they're usually built up at the sort of maybe a few meter type scale. The reservoir model scale, the RMS or the Petrel type models, are built at a 20 meter block scale or a 1 meter block scale. So one of the aspects for our geophysics and our integration is traversing these scales, either downscaling where we actually create more information that's in the seismic, or upscaling where we're actually taking the seismic resolution and smearing it down. So let's talk a little bit about the sources of the geological information and rock physics information. Where does it come from? Because up until perhaps the last couple of years, in fact, it's come from two sources: core data and wireline logs. And they both have, in their own ways, some strengths and weaknesses. We've got another two sources which I'll come on to. Core data is a very, is it representative? Is the main issue here. You're not getting much anisotropy represented or heterogeneity represented in your typical core plugs. They're usually a biased sample for a start. But the good things are that you can get this stuff quite easily. It's a routine service. The measurements are fairly reliable, some more than others, I guess. It depends on the methodology you use. We don't really capture the heterogeneity in this kind of method. There is a lot of bias, but it does translate often the ability to populate our models into effective properties. Wireline logs are probably the meat and drink. I've talked about the vast thousands of well logs that we've looked at over the last few years. The good things about them is that you do get a good vertical sampling. It's a routine practice. You can phone up and for a few $100, get a wireline log in most parts of the world. It's very versatile. The logging ranges in most of the developed areas. You can usually get P-wave information. You can usually get density, and increasingly you can get shear log information. Although that's probably only the last 10 years that we can start to trust that. The big problem is the amount of work that goes into trusting your logs. Usually, because of the mud technologies, have damage and invasion zones. Sometimes the measurements are in, say, one direction only. Obviously, you're just looking down the borehole. Increasingly, we're starting to see vertical wells twinned with horizontal components, and that can be extremely useful because particularly if you get a VSP in there, because you start to get a range of azimuths out of the information, which you can utilise very usefully. This is a new form of rock information which we start to see. It is rather physics dependent. I think we're getting increasingly cocky about the fact that we can make predictive geophysics work at the level of the thin section and maybe even the core. You don't have the experimental errors. You're using well understood algorithms to sort of reproduce the data distribution and calculate direct from the geometry what the properties are. It can be extremely rapid. However, we've got some aspects of to give you representative information on the sort of seismic scale. Still a few issues there. One thing is that it's the known knowns and unknown unknowns argument. It's only going to tell you really what you thought in terms of the physics. So experiment will always capture some part of the world that our model doesn't. Prediction, modelling, we're working within a known paradigm. One thing which I think is coming up, and we're seeing it's a marvellous bridge again into the sort of world of the geologists, is actually starting to make good use of field outcrops. So here we've got a marvellous sort of example of some cross-bedding in I think Utah, and methodology whereby we can make measurements either at the rock face itself, using a combination of porosity measurements and handheld geophysics, if you like. That's what's being used by a number of groups. Make measurements in the field. There will be some imprint of the depths and the diagenesis, if you like, that those rocks have gone under. But you can start to make predictions and use models, particularly depth trending technologies, which you can take that down into the sort of reservoir depths and reservoir properties. So what the good thing about this is that it starts to tell you something about the real heterogeneity on a scale that you can study. And some of these outcrops that we've looked at, for example, in Spain, are 2 or 3 kilometres in length. So you're getting at the reservoir scale here. And we can sort of build up from, as you can see, these kind of litho log approaches here into synthetic logs, which we can then turn into synthetic seismic. And that's quite a good bridge. It's a bridge that we haven't had before. I think is quite interesting. I've seen some work being done, I think, over in Manchester, where we're working on capturing whole rock faces with LIDAR data, incredible scale, where you can really get down to the millimetre scale and turn these properties into synthetic models.